Okay. Good evening, everyone. Hope you're all doing well. We're going to get started now. We're learning tonight a full parak, and that is parak Notel, starting on the very bottom of Kuf Mem Aleph Amud Beis and going to the end of the parak on the bottom of Kuf Mem Gimel Amud Aleph. As discussed, we're not going to be learning together on Wednesday or Thursday in light of Tisha B'Av, unless, of course, Mir Tashem, it is a Yom Tov instead, and then the schedule will change. But in the meantime, we're going to learn a blot and a half tonight, tomorrow night, and Tuesday night, and then we'll pick up again on Shabbos, and then Sunday and Monday, and I think Tuesday will also be all a blot and a half each, and that will even us out. So hopefully we'll catch up at that point. But let's learn a parak of Shas right now, Mir Hashem. And a mazel tov to Mark Halford on finishing Sota, you and your Charusa. Maybe Zocha to finish Shas. So let's get started. Bottom of Kuf Mem Aleph Amud Beis, right at the new parak. No tell Adam as Benova, even the other one is allowed to pick up a child and a stone that is in their hand. The kalkala beha evan ship beha evan besocha. You can as well pick up a basket if there's a stone inside. Umitaltal and truma tmeya im teho Rabbi im chulin. You're allowed to carry a whole mixture of food, truma tmeya, which is inedible, with truma that is tahora, and chulin, that can be eaten under all circumstances. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, a din that's really not directly connected to this, but one that we will speak about in the Gemara no less. Af ma'alinis hameduma be'echad umeya. If there is a mixture of truma into chulin, that's called meduma. And if you enter a certain ratio where it's 1 to 101 parts, so then you can ruin the ratio. Then the truma becomes dissolved, becomes batel into the chulin. But in the meantime, this is meduma because it's echad b'meya, and that is the end of the Mishnah. Omar Rava seems to not really directly connect to our Mishnah, but we will see a little bit later how they do connect. Opens the Gemara 3 lines into the new parak here. Amar Rava, Hoti Tino Chai V'Kis Tali B'Tzavar. A person's carrying a baby who is alive and well, and there is some type of purse around his neck, some type of money belt that's around him. So then Chayiv Mishum Kis. You're not going to be Chayiv on the baby, but you will be Chayiv on the wallet, on the purse that you're carrying. Tino Meis Rahman al-Islan, if a person's carrying a baby that is not alive, V'Kis Tali B'Tzavar, and this the same money purse of some kind. So then, pater. Then the halacha is you'd be pater under all circumstances. Now the Gemara is going to analyze each of these cases. Tino chai b'kis tel b'tzavar chai mishum kis. We said that if there's a baby that's alive and it has a money purse around its neck, you're going to be chayav for the kis, but the chayav nami mishum tino. Why are you not going to be held accountable? If you walk outside carrying your child, you're not chayav for carrying on Shabbos. So it's just interesting to note that our Mishnah is not talking about carrying. Our Mishnah is talking about tiltul. So we're going to have to come back to see how Rava relates to our Mishnah, because our Mishnah, again, is not talking about this topic at all. Nevertheless, why is it that if a person is carrying a live baby that has a purse around its neck, that you're chayav on the kis but not on the tino? Answers the Gemara, Rava ki Rabbi Nosson svirale. And this is an idea that we've heard before. The Amar chai no say es atzmo, that a child or a person that's alive is deemed to be considered as if they've carried themselves. Afal pi that you're carrying them, but we've all carried. We've all carried people who have been not willing to be carried, and they're very hard to hold. When they push against you, and they're very difficult. Or someone who's sleeping, or someone who's unconscious. Those are all difficult things to do. But as a general rule, we assume that Chai Nosei is Atma. What's the minimum age for that? As it relates to Hilchos Nida, this comes up because husbands and wives are not supposed to pass things to one another. B'Shas Nida, say Harchaka Poshatim Yad Liyad. So at what point do we consider a baby to be Chai Nosei as Atma? Whatever the case may be, here in the Gemara, the assumption in our case of Rava is that Chai Nosei es Atzmo, and therefore he's going to be Chayiv on the kis, but not on the tino. B'levatel kis legabe tino. Why don't we say that the money purse is batel against the child? After all, we have a precedent for that. Mibotznan, 5 lines from the bottom. Mibotznan es hachai b'mita. If there's a person that's alive in a bed, and you carry the bed with the person on it, pater af al hamita shamita tfeilalo. Why there do we say that the bed is tafel to the person on the bed, and therefore you're pater for carrying? But when it comes to our case and the baby's alive, the purse is not pater to the baby. It's a great question. So the Gemara answers 4 lines from the bottom. No, it's different. Think about the functionality of it. The bed has one purpose, to hold up that person. So you're carrying the bed because it's holding the person. But when you're holding the baby that has this little purse around its neck, it's not a requirement. It's not like the only way to carry the baby. But here you're carrying that bed because there's a person on it who's sick, whatever the details are. So therefore the Gemara makes a distinction between these two. And therefore, kis legabe tinok lo mavatle le. But when it comes to the purse that's around the baby's neck, we would not be mavatel. And that explains the first case of Rava, where a baby is being carried and he is alive, and there's a purse around his neck that you're chayav for the kis, but not for the tinok. Again, for the tinok, it's chay noseis atzmo, and for the kis, it's not similar to the case of mita, so therefore we're going to continue and assume that we are chayav. 3 lines from the bottom. Tinok meis, God forbid, a baby that has passed away, the kis tadu levitzavaro, but we said there that if there's a kis that's wrapped around its neck, then pater. But the chayav mishum tinok, you just argued chay noseis atzmo 3 lines ago, Rabba. So if you want to say chay noseis atzmo, and therefore you're going to be putter, but this is not chai. This baby's mace. So if the baby's mace, God forbid, then you should say that you're chayiv in that case. Why are you assuming, Rava? You're splitting the same hair, but you're saying it's not fair. You're not being reasonable on both sides. So says the Gemara, no. Rava kiruv Shimon svirale de Amar hamalacha she'ena tzricha lagufa pater aleha. Just like we know, famously the Rav Shimon was of the opinion that a malacha she'ena tzricha lagufa, you're not carrying out the mace because of the mace. You're carrying out the mace because you don't want the mace in your house, whatever the logistics are, whatever the details, but it's not pe'etzem what you wanted to do, and therefore you're going to be pater. So Rava ends up being that in both cases on the child, whether the child is alive or not alive, that you're going to be pater on carrying that child. The only question is why? Is it because of chay noseis atzmo, or is it because we hold like Reb Shimon, the malacha she'ena tzricha lagufa? Tanan, the Gemara asks, no tel adam es benova even biyado. We said in a Mishnah that a person is allowed to carry a person is allowed to carry a child with the stone in his hand. And if that's the case, then I don't understand why Rava is an equivalent, and this is where we connect back to our Mishnah. Why did Rava say that the kiss you're going to be chayav on by the tinok that's chay, but when you pick up a child, he's allowed to hold an even? Those two things sound incongruent. You're saying that you're chayav on the kiss, but I can pick up a kid that's holding muksa. Why is it that when he's holding the muksa that we would say that that's usher? Right? You see the equivalence, it's a little bit of, they're really two different genres of discussion. One's tiltal and one's eruv. By Rava, he's dealing with eruv, and he's saying that the kiss you're still going to be chayav on, even though it's secondary to the baby. So what's the equivalence to our Mishnah? The equivalence to our Mishnah is that you're picking up a baby and the rock is not muksa, even though it's secondary to the baby. So we would have thought that all things secondary to the baby have the same status. Yet Rava says secondary to the baby is going to be chayiv, and our Mishnah says secondary to the baby is there's no issur of muksa at all. So that's the attempt of the Gemara's question. Answers the Gemara, a very interesting answer. Amre debei Rav Yanai v'tinok sheyesh lo gi'aguen al aviv. We're talking about a baby who has some enmeshment challenges with his father, just overly connected to the father, and therefore it's such an emotional scenario for the baby. There's a degree of sakana. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi, second line from the bottom of the page. Dibur hamaschil v'tinok sheyesh lo gi'aguen al aviv she'im lo yivlenu yechele. If the father does not pick up the baby, he'll become sick. V'lo ha'amidu tiltul shelo biyadayim b'makom sakana. They lo ha'amidu tiltul shelo biyadayim b'makom sakana. B'afal v'lav sakanas nefesh gemura ela sakanas chol. Just a small degree of illness, but really be'etzem, we do agree that secondary issues with babies on Shabbos would be problematic. We agree to Rava, really, but in our Mishnah, we have a little ukimta to explain why we said that the tiltal isn't the problem, because it was a baby that had gagun. So then we fall back on Rava's principle that really secondary issues are problematic. Now, we're only dealing in our Mishnah with dinei derabanan, so it doesn't entertain the level of chayiv. But when we talk about Rava, there we're talking about dinei deraisa because we're talking about carrying. They're just different sugyas. So the question really requires some analysis in regards to comparing our Mishnah, which is derabanan and talking about tiltal, to Rava, who's talking about avara and a din deraisa. It's really a difficult question in Lamdus to try to make the Gemara flow smoothly, but the Gemara embraces the question almost without challenge, and that is what the Gemara assumes, and we therefore answer accordingly that our Mishnah must be talking about a case of a baby that has giagu and it's going to have some degree of sakana, so therefore we're allowed to pick up the baby who's holding a rock. Now, what would be the halacha l'maisa if we're picking up a little baby? Really, we should try to pick up a kid who's not holding muktzah. Put down the toy, put down the marker. So that's a good idea. A couple of days ago, I happen to not have been on Shabbos. I'm trying to envision what it would have looked like. My wife bought these beautiful chairs from Home Goods, matching nice chairs with this beautiful light blue velvety feel to them. And my beautiful little son, Avi, took a marker to them. He colored all over them in dark navy blue on all of the seats of the chairs, on the backs of the chairs. Now, it was during the week, so I could easily freak out and grab the marker, no problem, grab the upholstery cleaner and try to clean it. On Shabbos, we would have been done for with the cleaning process, but it would have been better if it would have been possible for him to put down the marker first, because that marker is muksa. But now there are. This is actually the lenient case, but we'll see in a moment that didn't apply across the boards. Last two words on Kuf Mem Aleph on my base as we turn to the next blot. Ihachi, if this is the case, my area Evan. Why is it that our Mishnah limits us only to a case of an Evan? You can pick up a child when he's sad because it's an Evan. What about other things? Afilu dinar nami, maybe money too. What's the Havamina that we aren't allowed to do that with money? So says the Gemara, Alama Amar Rava. Rava himself said, Lo shanu ela Evan, aval dinar asar. Rava himself said that we're only allowed to do an Evan, but we're not allowed to do a dinar. We're not allowed to do money. So when you pick up your kid because he has the gaguim, he misses you so much, it's going to lead him to some type of machala. So then you could pick him up if he's holding a rock, certain types of muksa. But you can't pick him up if he's holding money. So says the Gemara, Even inaflala lo asi avuha liisuye. I'm not nervous that the father, when he sees a rock falls out of his kid's hand, he's going to go pick it up because it's not a loss to him. The rock has no value to him. Dinar we're much more naturally wired. We have a principle in halacha called Adam Bahul al Mamono. We have this principle by fires on Shabbos. We saw this earlier in the Maseches as well, that out of sheer concern that a person might just instinctively reach down and pick up the money, so therefore Rabbi made a distinction in our Mishnah that yes, you're allowed to pick up the baby with a rock, but not if he's holding money. Great timing. Yeah. But Rabbi said you're chayiv. Rabbi said in the case of carrying a live baby with a purse that you're going to be chayiv on the keys. We have to. Oh, sorry, our Mishnah. Excuse me. Going back to our Mishnah. Our Mishnah was specifically b'chatzer. I think Rashi writes that. Take a look at the first Rashi in the parak Kuf Mem Aleph from the base. Rashi says notel ve'evan biyado b'chatzer. Meaning our Mishnah is only what? Mutter to carry. So our concern here was that you may, was it Empikna Muksa? Yeah, that's a Rashi on the top of the page, as I misspoke. Take a look at the top Rashi on Kuf Mem Beis Meral. The time alav mishum tiltuhu dafilu la'ochso biyado ve'atinok mahalach baragav asar le rava dilman nafil ve'asi le'asuye v'keven delav sakanas nefshi lo sharu be tiltul. This is just the tiltul of the money itself. It's not about carrying Rishus Harabim. If that's what I said, it's incorrect. This is only talking about our Mishnah, which is talking about tiltul in a chatzer. But we were concerned that you pick up the money.
You're looking for the Rashi first.
What?
You're looking for the first Rashi in the Mishnah.
Yeah, I read that one, the chatzer. And then also the Rashi on the top of this page validates that. Oh no, hold on one second. What does Rashi say? Wait a minute. Our Mishnah says, Evan biyado, you pick up a child and he's holding a stone. Rashi says, b'chatzer. So that means we're not dealing with eruv, we're dealing with tiltul, right? But then asila asuye, look at the top Rashi, where he says that we are concerned about a dinar. The top Rashi says asila asuye, the time alav mishum tiltulhu, the afilu le'ochso biyado, the atinok mahalach baraglav asar le rava, dilma nafil va'asila asuye. We are afraid that you're going to carry. Maybe the concern was a further concern here that you're going to carry. We'll see in a minute if this may further itself. You may carry into another rishus at that point. So this is an interesting, I didn't catch this when I was learning it the first time, but there's a distinction here that the dinar, because in theory, who cares if you're picking up a dinar or a coin even in your yard? It's an equal muksa. So it seems from Rashi here that we're adding in a secondary concern of moving things from one location to another. It's a good question. Okay, and Tanya Kavase de Rava, we'll see that the second part of this source, this brisa, supports Rava, and we'll get to how it connects us in a moment. But the first part is not immediately connecting to our case. Hamotzi kelav mekupalinu munachan al tefo. A person carries out clothing that's folded on their shoulder. We learned this earlier in the Masechta. How far long ago? I don't remember where. And if like your talis folded on your shoulder is like the classic example of that. The sandala v'tabeosa biyado. You're holding your sandals, you're holding your rings in your hands. In those cases, you're going to be chayiv. That's just regular carrying. V'imhaya malubash behen pater. If you're wearing them, you would not be chayiv. And then this is how it relates to us. Hamotzi adam. You're carrying a person. This goes back to Rava's initial part of our Gemara. Hamotzi adam v'kelav alav v'sandala v'ragla v'tabeosa biyadav pater v'ilu hotzian kemos shehein. If you're carrying the baby with the purse around its neck, chayiv. So that's how we see a raya for the shita of Rava, that Rava was clearly making sense here and all the distinctions therein. That the chayno says, atzmo, you're not chayiv there. All of that plays into this brisa, where we see that you're going to be chayiv on the clothing that you carry. Okay, Kalkala b'ha'evan besocha. What about carrying a basket that has a stone in it? It says the Gemara ve'amai. Why are you allowed to carry it? Tehave kalkala basis l'davar ha'aser. It should be, and we have a principle like this. I asked a Shaila on Friday night this week, or last Shabbos, can't remember, the weeks are so blurred, that my keys were inside my shtender, my key to my car. Am I allowed to move my shtender? I put it there intentionally, but I also had things in there that were mutter to use. So had it only been that inside of my shtender had the key in it, that would be a bastis to davar ha'aser. That's this question. What do you mean? You put a rock inside a basket, you can't go pick up the basket. That's not allowed. Rabbi Robinson said, because there are things that are mutter in there as well, so therefore it's bastis to davar ha'aser ula davar ha'mutter. That's multiple things going on inside the shtender. Therefore, I can slide the shtender to the appropriate spot. I wanted to move it to the middle, one kid on each side, less fighting, more parenting. So that's what I was aiming for, and I just wanted to be able to move it. So he said it was mutter to move. But here, you put a rock inside a basket before Shabbos. That should be bastis l'davar ha'aser. You should not be allowed to move it. Amar Rabba bar bar Chana, Amar Rav Yochanan hacha bekalkala malaya peros askinu. No, it doesn't only. This is the same thing. It doesn't only have the rock in it. It's a fruit basket. It's got 10 apples in it. So the apples plus the rock, it's therefore mutter to take the kalkala with the stone in it, and we'll add in the Gemara's commentary with fruit as well. You should spill out all the fruit, spill out the rock, and then and then reload the basket with fruit only. Perfect idea. Just dump it all out. Says the Gemara, not a bad idea. But when you're dealing with fruit that can get bruised very easily, that's Kid Rabbi Eloi. Amar Rav, in the name of Rav, Beperos hamitantin, they'll get ruined very easily. Hachanami, in our case as well, in our Mishnah, Beperos hamitantin, we're dealing with a case where you cannot pour them out. So now we have two things added to our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said you can carry a basket with a stone in it that has fruit that easily gets damaged or dirty. Okay, those are the two qualifications of our Mishnah. Okay, we should shake it up in a way where at some point the rock will come on the top and then you can pour out the rock. Here we're dealing with a basket that is broken. It has like a crack in it, and the rock is actually being used as part of it. To Evan Gufa Naases Dofan Kalkala. That the rock is playing a secondary role. It's not just your thorn in your side of muksa. It's also playing a role as part of the basket itself. 1/3 of the way down. The taltalin, truma, vichule. Our Mishnah said that we're allowed to carry truma, and even if it's truma tmeya. So it says the Gemara, Amar Rechizda lo shanu. When are we allowed to carry that basket? Ella shetahora lamata v'tmeya lamala. Let's say that the apples beneath were the ones that were tahor, but the oranges above are tameh. So then you're allowed to carry it because you cannot easily access that lower layer. Aval tahora lamala utmeya lamata. But if the ones that were accessible, the tumah that was tahor was the top layer. If the oranges on the top were the ones that were tahor, and underneath were the ones that were tameh, then you can't carry the basket because you have direct access to what you need. Shakilei l'tahora v'shavik lei l'tmeya. Take what you need and leave that which is tameh. You have access to it. So our Mishnah, the thrust of our Mishnah by truma, when you have this mixed bag of truma, tmei, and tahora, is that it's only true if you don't have access to that which you want. But if you have access, so then you should only take the tahora ones. Why don't we dump out the same basket? Same question we asked before about the rock. Why here by the truma, tmei, truma, tahora? Why don't we dump it all out and then refill only the apples or whatever's tahor? So says the Gemara, same answer as before. Amar Rabbi Loi, Amar Rav, the peros hamitanfin askinan, same deal, easily dirtied, easily bruised fruit. Says the Gemara, I understand your distinction, Rav Chizda, about where the location is, top or bottom of the tahora. I understand that. And if it's underneath, if the tahora, the truma tahora is underneath, it's harder to get so you can carry the basket. Fine, I understand that. But I have a Tanaic source that does not agree with you. Meisive, halfway down, the taltal and truma tmei im tahora. One is allowed to carry truma tmei im tahora, v'im chulin, with chulin as well. And here's the kicker. Bein shetahora lamala utmei lamata, bein shetmei lamala utahora lamata, tiyuvta de Rav Chizda. Now Rav Chizda made the distinction that if the truma tahora was on the top, you're not allowed to carry the basket. Here we see, no matter where the truma tahora is, top or bottom, you're allowed to carry it. So how does Rav Chizda have? He's a Tanaic source against him. What does he do? Amar lach Rav Chizda masnisan letzorech gufo. Our Mishnah was dealing with only letzorech gufo, but Braisa letzorech makomo. The Braisa was more lenient, where you even needed the space where the basket was sitting. So therefore, you can move the whole basket afal pi that the truma tahora is on top, because we do paskin this way, but here there's seemingly a distinction that's made that the Bryce was talking about letzarach gufo and letzarach makomo. So therefore, even if the truma tahora is accessible, but because of the fact that it's mutter letzarach gufo, you can move it. Masha'enken, our Mishnah, only letzarach gufo, only when you want the fruit itself. So therefore, our Mishnah, Rav Chizda limited our Mishnah to say only when the truma tahora is on top, because it's only letzarach gufo. So says the Gemara, it's a little bit of a stretch. We have a Mishnah and a Brisa. The Mishnah is limited by Rav Chizda that it can only be carried when the truma tahora is underneath the tmeya. And then the Brisa is more lenient. So you said our Mishnah is a tzarech gufo and the Brisa is a tzarech makomo. Clever answer, but it's a little dachuk. So that's what the Gemara is bothered by right here. My dochke de Rav Chizda laokme masniz on tzarech gufo. You're pushing very hard. It's a very strange answer. It's a very strange answer. So says the Gemara, not really. Amar Rava, I have a raya for you. Masnisim kavase deka. Our Mishnah is in fact a raya to this idea that our Mishnah is talking about gufo and the Brisa is talking about letzarach makomo. How so? Tikatani Seifa, the next Mishnah that we're going to learn, which is, actually we already learned it. Another Mishnah, a Seifa, a later Mishnah is taught that says as follows. Ma'os she'al hakar mina'ares hakar beheinu flos. That if there is money on top of a pillow, you shake the pillow until the coins fall off. V'amar Rabbi bar bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan lo shanu elo letzarach gufo, aval letzarach makomo. That if it's going to be in our Mishnah, when is it permissible that you're allowed to shake the coins off the pillow? That's only when you need the letzorach gufo. You need what's on it. You're allowed to move the whole thing letzorach gufo. So we have a raya to this approach that Rav Chizda is answering that our Mishnah is letzorach gufo and the Brisa is letzorach makomo. Next two dots, 2/3 of the way down, Kuf Mem Beis Madala. Let's go. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Afmal, and we spoke about meduma, which is where there is a ratio of less than 1 to 100 of truma mixed in chulin, and therefore this has this like halfway status, a confusing status of whether or not it's actually treated as truma, and therefore you cannot eat it. The amai hakamisake. Why are you allowed to do this on Shabbos? You're allowed to give meiser to get something out of the status of tevel. That should not be allowed. Hakamisake. Rabbi Yehuda Krebalazar Svirale. Rabbi Yehuda, who was the one in our Mishnah who brought this idea, who says that it's misake, and he says that it's mutter to do this. He says it's not misake because we hold like Rabbi Eliezer. What does Rabbi Eliezer hold? The Amar truma be'ena machta. We treat the truma as though it is its own entity, as though it's still separated from the rest of the pack. It's a 1 to 99 ratio, total of 100 units, and we look at it as its own separate unit. Now we're going to see 3 different shitas, 3 different Marim Makomos to support this idea. We'll blow away the first 2 and then accept the third. Ditznan, approach number 1, as to how we know that Truma Be'ena Machta, the reason why Rabbi Yehuda was going to allow in our Mishnah to function on this meduma, to make it permissible by, let's say, adding another unit to it. The reason it's permissible is because we treat the truma as a separate entity. That's not, as the Mishnah writes. If there was 1 unit of truma that fell into less than 100, and it became meduma, it became this mixture of truma and chulin, and then, as a secondary step, the nafal min ha-meduma lamakom acher, and then 1 unit from the meduma fell into another basket of fruit. So you have 2 stages here. So then that's a machlokes tanoim. Rabbi Eliezer Omer midama'as ketrumas vadai. We see that it's exactly like truma. That's our idea, that we have that 1 unit, we treat it separated. No, you have to do the math. So let's say, for example, you had your 1 piece to 99 in basket number 1, that's meduma. You take 1 out. It depends what you're adding it to. You have to look at the math again. If the unit is so much larger, so then it does dissolve and become mutter. So that is approach number 1. But says the Gemara, that doesn't work with the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer, which is approach number 1, that Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rabbi Eliezer, that we still see that it's like medamas ketrumas vadai, that we still treat it like truma. Says the Gemara, Eimar deshamas le'lechumra. I could understand the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer in that he's being strict and that he's saying that it's ketrumas vadai, and you're not really allowed to eat it. But lekula mishamas le. But here in our Mishnah, where you're trying to solve the problem of meduma and make it mutter, you think Rabbi Eliezer was going to be lenient? You have no way to assume that from here, because Rabbi Eliezer is only machmir. How can you assume that he would also, from a similar lumdus, how can you also assume he's going to be lenient? It says the Gemara, let's reject answer number 1 and move on to answer number 2. Ella hu de amar Reb Shimon. He holds like the opinion of Reb Shimon. What does Reb Shimon say? Keditnan, so truma shenafel l'mea. 1 unit of truma fell into 100. Below he speak lehagbia, and you didn't get to remove that ad shenafla acheres harezo asura. And then a second piece fell in. So now you have 2 units to 100, 2 units of truma to 100. So the Tanakama was of the opinion that that's asura. But Reb Shimon matir, and Reb Shimon was lenient. Now that's what we were looking for. Reb Shimon was lenient, and that was what Rabbi Yehuda was in our Mishnah. He was lenient. So we have our precedent. Says the Gemara Umimai. How do you know that Reb Shimon was lenient for those reasons, like the ones that align with our Mishnah, that it's permissible to remove the status of meduma from this mixture? Says the Gemara, Dilma Hasa, maybe over there by Reb Shimon, but here's really what they're arguing about. Even though the 2 units of truma that fell into the chulin were one after the other, and he treated them as though they fell in at the same time, and therefore it's 1 to 50 and 1 to 50. That's a possibility. But maybe Reb Shimon savar kamaisa batil b'mea v'hati batil b'mea v'chad. Maybe we could be looking at this in a more mathematical way instead of a halachic way, like Reb Shimon seems to be looking at it. And when you put in 1, it dissolves, and then you add 1 more, and you've got your perfect ratio of solving the problem of meduma. So therefore, you cannot learn back from Reb Shimon to our case of Rabbi Yehuda because they're approaching the math very differently. So let's go to answer number 3. Says the Gemara, Elihu de Amar Reb Shimon ben Elazar. What does Reb Shimon ben Elazar hold? The Tanya Reb Shimon ben Elazar Omer, no saying Eino bitzad ze ve'ochel mitzad acher. You're allowed to look at one side when you have all of these, this whole mixture of truma, and you have your meduma. He says it's really not me'akev. You're allowed to eat it in the first place, and therefore our Mishnah is not mesakein because it's permissible to eat in the first place. So it says the Gemara, the last few words on the page here is that uveloha Allah, the last few words of Rashi on the page, uveloha Allah maskil ve'ochel ein tikun v'hala aso. You don't actually have to make that change in order to permit the achila. And therefore, our Mishnah is not masakin. There's no problem. You don't have any halachic issues like you would by taking a kli to the mikvah, like that type of issue, or being masakin by giving meiser in order to remove the status of teva. So says the Gemara, wait a minute. Rabbi Yehuda holds like Reb Shimon ben Elazar. Umi savar lekavase. Does Rabbi Yehuda really hold like Reb Shimon ben Elazar? Turning to the top of Kuf men Beis and Beis. Mafli paligila iluya. We have an explicit mari makom that shows that they don't agree. What's that? The Tanya, the Brisa writes, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Malam Samaduma Be'achad B'meya. Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion that you are allowed to remove the status of Meduma Be'achad U'meya. That's our Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, no sein eino b'tzad zeh v'ochel b'tzad zeh. We see that that's not the case. We see that Rabbi Yehuda is seemingly being even more lenient than Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. So they don't agree with each other. So says the Gemara, you're right, they don't agree with each other. To Rabbi Yehuda, adifa mi de Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. He was being more kal. It's true, but that's what leads to the shita of our Mishnah, and that's how our Mishnah ends up working out. Either it's a little unclear to determine if in fact we are embracing this last shita of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, or if Rabbi Yehuda is a Tana in and of himself to have his own shita. A little unclear from this last line of the Gemara. Starting Baruch Hashem with a new Mishnah, and we have 2 Mishnayos left until the end of the parak, end of the night. Let's go. 5 lines down. Kuf men Beis and Beis. If you have a rock that's sitting on top of a cover of a barrel in order to make sure that it stays closed, you can tilt the barrel and let the rock go and make the rock fall off. What if there wasn't a lot of room to just tilt it? So then then pick up the whole thing, pick up the whole barrel, and then you can also tilt it. It's 2 levels. You don't only have to tilt it, you can even pick it up and tilt it. Those things are a little bit different. The actual, they're both tiltal, but picking one up seems to be a little bit worse. So the Mishnah is explicit about it. We just saw this quoted a few lines ago. If you have money that's on top of a pillow, no flows, you're allowed to shake the pillow, and the coins can fall off. If there's something dirty or some animal droppings, is one of the examples that's brought here in the portion. You can wipe it off with a rag. Super important halacha. It must be a dry rag. If you get something dirty on your shirt on Shabbos, you're not allowed to put any liquid on it at all. No baby wipes, no water, and then scrub, no liquid whatsoever. You can scratch at it. Maybe you can use a dry towel to wipe it off as long as there's no moisture. But this smartut in the Mishnah has to be dry because otherwise you'd violate the Isser of Libun. it is an Isser D'Oraisa. We should try to be very, very careful about this. I've been at people's homes where they're not familiar with these halachos, and I watched a scenario where a child vomited everywhere, and someone in the house started spraying the carpeting, which is straight up a malacha d'oraisa. We have to be careful. It's a little bit more instinctive not to like scratch your shirt by like licking your finger. That's an isser d'oraisa. We should be super careful about that. Anyways, finishing the Mishnah, haisa shel or, if it wasn't a garment that was absorbent, but rather it was leather, nosnin aleha mayim ad shetichle, you can keep pouring water on top of the leather until the lashleshes, that dirt or that the animal droppings that were on there, until it removes. Gemara, Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rab, lo shana ela b'shocheach. In this case, when is it that we're allowed to remove the rock from on top of the barrel? That's when you forgot about it. But if you specifically intended for it to be there, that's not allowed. You put a rock on top of a barrel, that's just, you ruin the barrel for Shabbos, you're done, you're not allowed to move. So the leniencies in our Mishnah were under that assumption. Who is the one who is of the opinion that when we have a mixture of that which is mutter to move and that which is not mutter to move, namely the barrel and the stone that's on top of it, that behetera tarchinan be'isur lo tarchinan, meaning why can't you just pick up the rock? Why do you have to tilt the barrel? Who is the Mari Makom that says that we're allowed to tilt the barrel to remove the rock or pick up the barrel in the middle case of our Mishnah? Who is the one who's of this opinion? So says the Gemara, Amar Rabba bar bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rashbagi. It's Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. Titnan haborer kitnis biyom tov. There are some shitas that on Yontif, the dinim of borer are different, whatever they may be. But there's a machlokes tanaim about this. Beishamai omrim borer ochel ve'ochel. You're only allowed to take the good from the bad. Says the Gemara, Beis Hillel omrim borer kedarko v'cheiko uvitamchui. You're allowed to separate normally like you would by separating things out in your lap or on a plate. No problem at all. The Tanya, Amar Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, Bamed Dvarim Amurim. When are you allowed to do this? Sheha Ochel Meruba al Apsoles. That's what we were just saying. Why can you pick up the barrel but not the rock? Because you have to focus on the Ochel when the Ochel is Meruba al Apsoles. Aval, however, if the Psoles is Meruba al Ochel, Divrei Hakol Borer Ba'ochel. So when you have that mixture, it's only when the Ochel is Meruba. Asks the Gemara, the Hacha, in our case, with the wine, the wine seems greater. The wine seems much larger than a rock. Otherwise, I don't know that it was really worth making a tiny little barrel if a little rock is bigger than the barrel. So that doesn't seem to make sense. Because there's no way to get to the food without removing the rock. So we therefore don't even look at the volume of the rock as the volume of the wine as being problematic. Next two dots, a little bit more than halfway down, Kufman Beis and Beis. We said in the first case of the Mishnah, you can tilt and the rock can fall off. The second case, we said you pick up the barrels and then you can dump off the rock. Tanya, the Brisa writes, Rabbi Yossi Omer, first of the longest lines, if it was in a warehouse, or there were just glasses around there that might break, Magbiha, you can pick it up, lemakom acher, you can even move it to another spot, umate alti, devino feles, the notel imena mashet tzarechlo umachzer the makoma. You can even move it. An extension of our Mishnah added by the Brisa, that it's not just pick up, tilt, and put back down, but you can even pick up, move over, tilt, and put back down. 2/3 of the way down. Mos shalakar, we said money that's on a pillow. This again, just like we saw in regards to the case of the barrels of wine with the rock on top, the same is true with your pillow. If you left money on your pillow intentionally, for whatever reason, you knew you were putting it there before your shower and you forgot, maybe that's the same shochech, we have to get into the poskim here, but if you did it on purpose, if you put it there on purpose, you're not allowed to move it. This is only true if you need the place, just pick up the whole pillow if you need the place. So what would you do in this case? You left your shaver on your bed, you left your coin on your bed on top of your pillow, pick up the whole pillow with the muksa, move it, put it down, get a new pillow. No problem. But you should not be tilting it off of the pillow if you did it on purpose, because that's basis davar asur davar mutter. Again, you're allowed to move everything, that's okay. The same exact sheet there as well. You're allowed to shake them off. It's similar again. We're focusing on this yet again. Amar Aboshia, shachach arniki b'chatzer. Person forgets their wallet outside in the chatzer. Maniach aleha kikar otino kumataltalo. You have a very big wallet. You can put a piece of bread on top of it, or a child on top of it, and you can pick it up and bring it inside. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak shachach leveina b'chatzer. You left out a very important piece of wood or a beam of some kind. So then maniach aleha kikar otino kumataltalo. There too. So anything you leave outside in your chatzer, and it's muksa, and you want to bring it in, so then we would then make it mutter to bring in. It's the reverse. It's the inverse of basis l'davar ha'aser. It's basis l'davar ha'mutter. Could you put something mutter on it? Yes. Yes. Yeah. It would be the same application. Probably. The only difference would be is that the status of basis l'davar ha'aser was first. It was already established before you added in whatever you decided to add. You put in your kippah on top of it, whatever it's mutter. I don't know how that would play out the mice. I love this. I could hear both sides, but I'm not totally sure. Don't know. Amar Rav Yehuda Bar Shila Amar Abasi. Pamachas shachachu diskia malaya maos bisratia. Somebody left a full purse of money in a sratia, in an outdoor place, not an indoor place. Who go v'shalas Rav Yochanan. They went in. They asked the shalat Rav Yochanan. Amar lahen. And he said, "Hanichu lahen kikar otinok b'til taluha." You're allowed to carry it in by putting a child on. It actually can't be a place of isser to carry. I thought a sracha was an outdoor place. Yeah, Rashi says rishus harabim. What does that mean? Why are you allowed to carry that? Why am I only thinking about this now for the first time? The lishterei, Rashi says, second of the widest lines, Dibra Maschal Hanichu Alea Kikar Otinok, the lishterei the tiltala, Agabayu Toch Daled Amos, within Daled Amos, the tiltaluha Pachos Midaled Amos, so they workaround. So workaround. So you have something very significant that's in Rishus Harabim, and the way that we matir double issues, we matir the issue of Ha'avara, Daled Amos Rishus Harabim, and we also matir the issue of tiltal. The tiltal we solve by the problem of putting the baby on top of it, and the havara we solve by moving less than daled amos. So obviously it's a case of significance where there's a tremendous hefsid. So in those cases, that's how the Gemara would solve that problem. And that's what Rav Yochanan was suggesting. That's how you get out of this problem, because the strachas are rishus harabim. So pachos arba amos, you're allowed to get it closer to your rishus. Amar Mar Zutra hilchasa kechol hanishmaisa bishocheach. Mar Zutra says all of these are true. Again, bishocheach. We saw this already. But the reason why this is important is because of the contrasting next line. Ravashi Amar afilu shachach nami lo. No, you're never allowed to use these leniencies that we just saw. The one in the sratia or the one in the chatzer. You can never put a baby or a kikar on top of your item and bring it back in. That's never allowed. Below amru kikar otinok ela lemeis bilvad. Wow. Okay, but this does not really work for Abaye and Rabbi. Abaye and Rabbi were of a different opinion. What did they say? Abaye manach kipa akipe. He would take a spoon and put it on straw that was otherwise muksa in order to move it. Rabba manach sakina abaryona umetaltala, and he would put a knife on top of a bird umetaltala, and then he would say it was allowed to be carried. Amar Rav Yosef was the third generation of Amorim. He was older, so he's looking at Abaye and Rava, these young new poskim on the scene, and he calls them out. These little children, they're trying to think so much. They think they've come up with such clever solutions. The Rabbanan, in the best case scenario, would say that it's okay to be shocheach, that if you forgot. But l'chatchila, mi amor, you Abaye Rabbi, you're allowed to say that l'chatchila you can do this on purpose. So they responded even more sharply. Amar Abaye, if I wasn't a representative of the community, ana kafa akipe lamali, I wouldn't have even put the spoon on top of it. I can go take a nap on there. That's not muksa. But I know what the trends are. I know what people do. This is one of those times where a posek has to paskin within the norms. You can't go too crazy with your psakim. And this is a principle that we see in the poskim where they write a language of lule de mistafina. If I wasn't afraid to say X, I would paskin a little bit more lenient. And Rava says the same. Amar Rava, Anna, me too. If I wasn't a representative of the community, if I wasn't a chashiv person, takina everyona lamali, chazili laomtza. I could eat it raw. There's no reason why I can't. The animal's shechted already. I'm just bringing the knife and I'm carrying the meat. The meat's muksa because it's raw. No, I could eat it raw too. But I just don't want to paskin in a way that's going to ruffle feathers. The chazil umsa. The reason why it's permissible is because it's edible. Halo chazil umsa lo. However, if the food was not edible, then of course that should be problematic. That should be assumed from our case, because that's what Rava was arguing. Rava said, the knife on the raw meat, I don't even really need that because the meat is edible. What if the meat's not edible? Lememra, this assumes to say, the Rava Rabbi Yehuda Sfirale, that Rava holds like Rabbi Yehuda, but that can't be because Amar Rava Lashame, Tavui li bar avza, roast for me a bird, v'shadi me eha l'shunra. The parts of the animals that are inedible to me, the intestines, you can't eat those uncooked, those are inedible. And yet, what do we see he told his servant to do? To give it to the cats. But that means that he was moving muksa on Shabbos. That's not edible for you. So why are you moving it? It should be considered umsa that you're not allowed to move. Yet we see that that's movable. Says the Gemara, Hassam, over there, he knew what he was going to be doing. They were going to cook the bird on Shabbos, and he knew that the me'eha, that the intestines would go bad for after Yantif, by the time that they were ready to cook it. Hassam Kavan, the Misrach Daiti Ilu Yamei Etmo, because he had it in mind, it therefore didn't have a status of muksa. Hachanami Mistabra, this makes sense to Rava Rabbi Yehuda Sfirale. How do we know the Rava holds like Rabbi Yehuda? The Darash Rava. What does Rava hold? Isha lo sikanes lebeis ha'etzim litol mehen ud. The ud shenishbar asar lahaziko b'yom tov lefish masikim b'kelim. Ben masikim shivre kelim. Ben masikim b'shivre kelim. So this is a case where a woman should not go into the house where they store wood and take from there a piece of wood, and even a piece of wood that's broken, it's asar to be masik for yantiv. So there we see that because it's usher to use, it no longer has a purpose for us, that it's masikin b'kelim, ve'in masikin b'shivre kelim. If it's not shaykh for us, then we should not do it. And the only reason it would be mutter is if you have it in mind. So this therefore supports the opinion that Rava is like the Shita Rabbi Yehuda Shemamina. Let's learn the last Mishnah for the evening and get to the end of this parak. But Beishamei Omer Ma'avir Me'al HaShulchan Atzamos Uklipin, cleaning off the table after the meal. You're allowed to clean off of the table on Shabbos at some of bones and shells of foods that you ate. You have to pick up the whole table, kula, umanara, and shake it off. A little bit more indirect, similar to the barrel case that we saw in the previous Mishnah. You're allowed to remove crumbs from the table in a shear that are less than a kazayis, even less than a kazayis. The seir shel afunin, the seir adashen, mipnei shumaychal behema. These are the things that grow in like pods, like peas and lentils and edamame, those kinds of things. So even that is mutter as well because it's maichal behema, even though we don't eat them, even though they're a little hard to chew. But they're sufficient for an animal. Sifog, what about a sponge? Totally unrelated to what we're talking about. Im yeshlo or base achiza. If it has a handle and you're not just grabbing onto the sponge, then mekanchin bo. Im lav, ein mekanchin bo. But if you're just grabbing onto the sponge, that's not allowed for obvious reasons, which is that it's chita. So we have these Shabbos sponges that are made from this netting of plastic that doesn't actually squeeze, it doesn't actually absorb water either. The water kind of stays a little bit in between the fibers, not even fibers, in between the plastic pieces, but it really doesn't absorb. Now, some poskim are concerned about brushing your teeth on Shabbos for one of these reasons, because they assume that there's a degree of schita with the plastic fibers in a toothbrush. Some other poskim said there's no absorption there. Plastic doesn't absorb things. It's not porous. So those are some of the shilas that come up over there, and some of these Mari Makomos will be included there. And that's the Shita. Let's just finish up this Mishnah here. Ben kach nital b'Shabbos ve'eino mekabel tuma. Either way, they are not muksa, and they can be carried on Shabbos. Amar Rav Nachman, anu ein lanu ela beis Shammai, Krib Yehuda beis Hillel, Krib Shimon. They said the Mishnah was not phrased like this. But Beis Shammai, the name is wrong. It should say the Machlokas is Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, and not Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel. The fact that you're allowed to remove less than a kazayas of peiros, as is indicated in our Mishnah, that follows it. That is a support. It doesn't follow because Rabbi Yochanan was later. It's a support for the later sheets of Rabbi Yochanan. Dam Rabbi Yochanan peirurin she'ein bahen kazayas. If there's less than a kazayas, asher le'abdan biyad. You are not allowed intentionally to throw out bread, even if it's less than a kazayas. When I was in yeshiva in Shalavim, I had a Rabbi, Reb Hendler. Every piece of bread that he saw, even sitting on the top of the garbage can, he would take it out and he would, I don't know what he did with it afterward, but he would not let it be thrown out in the garbage without wrapping it up. Just a shtickle chumrah. I don't know. I presume that it's based on this. Seir shelapun, in these pods, money. Who is this like that you're allowed to use this food, even though it's food for a behema, not food for a person? The shells of the edamame or the peas. Money, Reb Shimon he to lesle muksa. He is the one who has a limited version. Remember that Reb Shimon doesn't mean that there's no muksa, but just a limited version of muksa. Ema seifa. Wait a minute. It says later, Svog im yeshlo beis achiza mekanchin bo, b'im lav ein mekanchin bo, asan l'Reb Yehuda damar davar shem miskaven aser. So that seems to be a little bit of a contradiction that our Mishnah at the end, in our Mishnah, when it talks about the case of the pods of the edamame and the peas and the lentils, we seem to hold like Reb Shimon, that there's no muksa. And yet there's another part of the brisa by the Svog, which seems that we hold like Reb Yehuda, that's davar she'ein miskaven aser, because he says you're not allowed to use the sponge, it's going to be schita. So says the Gemara, no, Reb Shimon agrees with that case. That case is not subject to machlokas. Why not? We've seen this line about 10 times in this Masechta, maybe more. Beha, afilu Reb Shimon modeh. Reb Shimon would even agree with the case of the sponge that doesn't have a handle. When the result is a guarantee, then even Reb Shimon would agree that is asur. We don't allow for a person to do an action that has an automatic, guaranteed, halachically problematic result. That's not what we do. So that's why the Gemara has no problem with this Mishnah having parts being like Reb Shimon and parts being like both. But no, Reb Shimon was not going to disagree with that din. Even Reb Shimon, who would say davar she'ein miskaven is mutter, he would say that the sponge is still asur because it's a psik reishe below yamos. Says the Gemara, Hani garin and detamre armiasa. These seeds of Armenian dates, sharu latiltulinhu hol v'chazin agav iman. These were very poor quality dates, and they were typically given to animals as food, with the pit included. So therefore, the whole thing, even the pit, was considered to be a meichel, because even though you're eating it, it's what's in front of you, but it's not the best apple in the bunch, so you eat it. It wasn't the best date to eat, but you ate it. There, the pits were going to be problematic because those pits were not ra'oi for a behema, because there, the fruit, the flesh on there was so much better. It was only given to people. So they would never take the pits and give them to animals, so therefore it would be asur. Shmuel metalta lahu agav rifta. Shmuel would carry this pit, he'd spit it out of his mouth, the parsiyasa, he'd put it on bread. Shmuel latayme damar Shmuel osa adam kol tzarcho bepas. Shmuel was of the opinion that you can do a lot of different things with bread. We don't have time to jump into this, but he would use it for a variety of different things. Rabbi metaltalu agav lekana demaya. He would take the pit and spit it out into a barrel of water or some kind of spittoon where you put the water into. Rav Huna bereid Rav Yeshua avilu kegraf shel rei. He treated it like a graf shel rei. Rashi, Ibramas shel graf shel rei, 6 lines from the bottom of the end of the paragraph. Shel rei sobran lefanav kisheochel hatmarim ad shenim eses be'inav. He would eat enough of them until he'd look at the pile and say, this is gross, graf shel rei, and then it was mutter to move, just like a diaper would be mutter to move a graf shel rei. Amar le Rav Ashi la meimar v'chiyos and graf shel rei v'chatchila. Why, you're allowed to sit there and generate a graf shel rei on your own? You could just, it's one thing if you have a dirty diaper from a baby. Okay, that's not an option that you choose for necessarily, but you're sitting there intentionally building the pile big enough to be a graf shel rei. Doesn't make any sense. The Gemara doesn't really answer this. Rav Sheshes zarik lehu bilishne. He would spit it out of his mouth into a location instead of handling it with his hands. Rav Papa zarik le'achorei amita. He would throw it behind his bed. Not advisable. Amru alav al Reb Zechariah ben Avkulas shahaya machzir panav achorei amita v'zarak. He too would do the same thing. Achorei amita. And Rashi here says, last Rashi in the parak, last Rashi on the amud. And last Rashi for the night, it was the bed that he was sitting on. It wasn't the bed that they were sleeping on. They were lying down on these beds. So he'd lie down a little bit, and then he'd spit it out of his mouth, and that would be it. Hadron alach notel adam espeno. Hadron alach notel adam espeno. Hadron alach notel adam espeno. Mazel tov on another parak. Years Hashem, we should come back to this parak in 7.5 years. Wishing you a beautiful night.